The 1920s in America were bright, vibrant, and seemingly unstoppable. Cities buzzed with cars, radios, and jazz. Skyscrapers rose like monuments to human ambition. Families dreamed boldly: home ownership, prosperity, the promise of the American dream. But beneath the glittering surface, there were cracks. Banks lending recklessly, farmers overextending their land, and stock speculation fueled by optimism rather than reason. Few Americans understood that prosperity could vanish almost overnight. In New York, men in dark suits and fedoras walked briskly to the stock exchange, certain of their fortunes. Farmers in Kansas tilled the earth, confident that crops would fetch high prices. Families in small towns built homes, bought new cars, and believed the good times would never end. And yet, all of it was about to crumble. October 24, 1929. The trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange was a storm of voices, ticker tape, and fear. Prices began to drop. Panic spread. Brokers shouted, phones rang incessantly, and investors raced to sell, desperate to escape the inevitable losses. By the end of the day, billions had evaporated. People who had invested their life savings or borrowed heavily to buy stocks found themselves destitute. For ordinary Americans, the crash was more than numbers. It was a shock to the system. Bank accounts disappeared. Retirement savings were gone. Families that had once lived comfortably now faced immediate insecurity. Credit lines vanished. Stores began to limit purchases as the ripple effects reached Main Street. In the towns outside New York, the news spread like wildfire. In Detroit, factory workers anxiously waited to hear if their jobs would survive. In rural Iowa, farmers stared at their fields, unsure if they would have the money to buy seeds for the next planting. Across America, uncertainty replaced confidence, and fear replaced joy. The Depression did not discriminate, but it hit cities in particularly cruel ways. Detroit, the Motor City, became a symbol of industrial collapse. Factories that once roared with life went silent. Streets filled with lines of men waiting at soup kitchens. Families crowded into tiny apartments or rooms rented by the week. One of the most dramatic moments occurred during the Ford Hunger March. Thousands of unemployed auto workers marched from Detroit to Dearborn, demanding work, food, and dignity. The protest ended in violence. Police fired on the crowd, and several lives were lost. This event was not isolated. Across America, protests and demonstrations became increasingly common as people refused to passively accept destitution. While cities suffered from unemployment and hunger, the Great Plains faced an environmental catastrophe. Years of overplowing, overgrazing, and poor agricultural practices had left the soil fragile. Then came the drought. Winds picked up the dry topsoil and carried it in massive clouds across the plains. The Dust Bowl was born. Houses were buried in dust. Crops failed. Families could not grow enough food to survive. Livestock perished. People were forced to abandon their homes and migrate westward in search of work. California and other states became destinations for these Dust Bowl refugees. Life on the road was harsh. Migrant camps were overcrowded, unsanitary, and often dangerous. Yet even in these dire circumstances, communities formed. People shared food, helped each other with work, and supported neighbors in ways the government could not. Survival required ingenuity. Families improvised, adapted, and found ways to make ends meet with almost nothing. Women became the backbone of household survival. They grew gardens, raised chickens, preserved food, and crafted clothing from whatever materials were available. Flour sacks were transformed into dresses. Old furniture was repaired and repurposed. Kitchens became small workshops, producing soap, butter, and other essentials. Men who lost jobs took whatever work they could find. breaking rocks, picking crops, or hopping freight trains to distant towns. Children often left school to help at home, work in factories, or care for younger siblings. Communities organized informal support networks, bartering goods and services to ensure no one went completely without. Even in small towns, extraordinary acts of creativity and solidarity were common. Farmers facing foreclosure organized penny auctions, bidding symbolic amounts on their land and returning it to the original owner. Towns issued local scrip to allow trade when banks failed. These small measures kept communities afloat and allowed people to maintain a sense of agency amidst the chaos. Hunger was widespread. Malnutrition affected millions of Americans. Families often survived on cornmeal, beans, and whatever vegetables they could grow themselves. Meals were sparse and portions were small. Soup kitchens became critical lifelines. Churches, civic organizations, and volunteers distributed food to those in need. Every family was touched by the crisis in some way.
My health suffered. Diseases spread more easily due to poor nutrition and crowded living conditions. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Access to medical care was limited, and families often had to rely on home remedies or the support of neighbors. Children, in particular, bore the brunt of these hardships. Many grew up undernourished, sickly, and forced to grow up faster than they should have. The psychological toll was immense. Men struggled with the shame of unemployment. Families faced stress and tension. Communities saw increased rates of despair. But they also witnessed resilience, ingenuity, and the quiet courage of ordinary people confronting extraordinary circumstances. Women's contributions during the Depression were profound and often underappreciated. They were not only caretakers, but innovators, community organizers, and leaders of survival efforts. Women bartered goods, formed sewing circles, and created networks to help neighbors. Many ran boarding houses, took in laundry, or made and sold handicrafts. In some cases, women became the primary breadwinners for their families. They managed tight budgets, grew and preserved food, and found ways to provide for children despite the scarcity of resources. In doing so, they ensured that families could survive the decade, keeping hope alive in households across the country. Children faced enormous challenges. Many left school to work or care for family members. Some schools closed due to lack of funding. Others operated with limited resources, using textbooks salvaged from previous years and teachers who often volunteered their time without pay. Despite these hardships, children adapted. They played in vacant lots, invented games with minimal materials, and learned resilience from the adults around them. These experiences, though difficult, shaped a generation that valued resourcefulness, community, and the ability to endure adversity. Even in the darkest times, communities found ways to come together. Neighbors shared food, bartered goods, and supported each other through illness and loss. Small towns held benefit events, community dinners, and fundraisers to help families in need. Mutual aid societies, church groups, and local organizations became lifelines. They coordinated relief efforts, organized work projects, and offered emotional support. These acts of solidarity provided not only physical sustenance, but also a sense of belonging and purpose in a world that seemed to have collapsed. By the early 1930s, the federal government recognized the depth of the crisis. President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of programs designed to provide relief, create jobs, and stabilize the economy. Public works projects built roads, bridges, and schools. Social programs offered food, housing, and medical care to those in need. The New Deal did not immediately end the Depression, but it provided hope and structure. Americans saw that government intervention could help protect citizens and stabilize the nation. While the road to recovery was long, the New Deal laid the foundation for future social programs and economic policies. Amid the sweeping historical events, countless individual stories of resilience stand out. Families who lost everything rebuilt their lives from scratch. Farmers who migrated west adapted to new land and work. Children who left school returned stronger and more determined. Women who managed households innovated and created new opportunities for survival. One story tells of a small family in Oklahoma who lost their farm for foreclosure. They traveled in a beat-up truck with their children and livestock, living in camps along the way. Despite the hardships, they found work picking crops and eventually saved enough to buy a small plot of land in California. Their perseverance reflects the determination of countless Americans who refused to surrender to despair. Even in hardship, creativity flourished. Literature, music, and art reflected the struggles and hopes of the time. Writers chronicled the experiences of families and workers. Folk songs and blues captured the pain and resilience of ordinary people. Visual artists depicted the stark realities of life, from Dust Bowl landscapes to urban poverty. These cultural expressions not only provided an outlet for emotion, but also preserved the stories of the era. They reminded Americans that even in despair, there was meaning, beauty, and the potential for change. The Great Depression left deep scars, but also taught vital lessons. It revealed the fragility of financial systems, the importance of government intervention, and the resilience of individuals and communities. It showed that survival often depended on creativity, solidarity, and the willingness to adapt. Generations that lived through the Depression carried these lessons forward. They became frugal, resourceful, and conscious of economic vulnerability. They valued community, mutual aid, and the dignity of work. These lessons became part of the American identity, shaping attitudes and behaviors long after the decade ended. By the early 1930s, the economy was beginning to recover, though not fully. The looming threat of war in Europe spurred industrial growth in the United States. Factories reopened, jobs increased, and families began to regain stability. Yet the memories of the Depression remained vivid. Those who lived through the decade remembered the hardships, the losses, and the small victories. They carried with them stories of survival, courage, and community that would be told to children and grandchildren. The decade shaped the nation, leaving an indelible mark on its people, culture, and policies. The Great Depression was more than an economic crisis. It was a human story. It was the story of families who lost everything and rebuilt. It was the story of communities that came together, of children who learned resilience, and of individuals who found hope amidst despair. Even today, the voices of that era echo. They remind us that human strength, ingenuity, and solidarity can endure even the darkest times. The Great Depression was a decade of loss, yes, but also of courage, adaptation, and the unwavering will to survive. America emerged scarred, wiser, and stronger. And the lessons of that decade continue to resonate, a testament to the resilience of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances.